Hello, this is a video just introducing the basics of what it means to have strong academic writing. What is academic writing? How does it differ from maybe other types of writing that you do? And what are the general expectations surrounding it? This video is one that really can be thought of at all levels, and while many of the pieces I discuss in the video are really focused on academic writing, these are also a lot of aspects that just make writing strong, whether we're talking in an academic setting, college setting, or even out in like the workplace. So first of all, before I get into kind of the pieces of academic writing, I just wanted to clarify that when we're writing in college, that it is different than writing in other places. There are different standards, there are different expectations, and there are different sort of guidelines that we use to think of in terms and decide or critique even what academic writing is. So some of you may have done writing in your jobs, in the workplace. Some of you may have done writing in previous school, in say high school, for instance. And some of you may be coming into a college classroom without having done lots of writing. And so really this video is designed to just set everyone up so we're all on the same playing field with the same level of expectations and understanding about what it means. So first of all, I want to start off with audience and purpose because these are two extremely important aspects of academic writing, and these are also really important aspects of business writing or technical writing out in the workplace too. But first off, it's just important to know who you're writing to and why you are writing to them. If you're writing to try and persuade someone of something, your tone is going to be a little bit different rather than writing to maybe offer a recommendation about something or to ask a question. All those are different reasons. They would have different tones, different formats that they might take, yet they're all types of writing. And so when we're writing in college and when you're thinking of academic writing, one of the recommendations that I would have is don't just think in terms of those big essays or big projects. Think in terms of everything that you write within college in academia is part of this whole world of academic writing and should follow many of these rules. So that's regardless of whether you're sending an email to your professor, responding to other students during, say, a peer review or a class discussion, or even doing like a personal response or personal reflection. It's all going out to someone else to read, and so you really want to remember that you are in a professional setting. And so it doesn't always just pertain to essays. This is really something you want to think about every time you sit down to write something for colleges. Who are you writing to? Why are you writing to them? What are you hoping to achieve, or what's the goal? You also want to consider your audience's values and beliefs when thinking through content, including evidence and explaining your ideas or explaining your points. So it's not about just putting your ideas out there. It's actually about putting your ideas out there in a way that your audience is going to be able to hear what you're saying. So you can't, or you should try and avoid any sort of statements, content, anything that is confrontational or is going to come across harsh or sounds unnecessarily blunt or argumentative, because that could be taken wrong by your audience. And so you really want to make sure that you're considering how they are going to perceive your message, whoever that is, and that what you are including in your message is, again, whether it's an essay, an email, doesn't matter the type of writing, but whether it's appropriate for that group and what they're looking for. Also, when it comes to actual essays, it's really good to always consider that there is opposing viewpoints and what those are, and to recognize that there are more than one side to the issue. It's not about trying to prove your audience wrong or trying to prove the opposition wrong. It's about recognizing that there is more than one idea, solution, contribution, um, sort of anything that someone else brings to the table. You really want to recognize that. And that can be things like considering perspective. So a perspective from, say, a sociological standpoint or a cultural standpoint is different from a perspective on government. Yet all of those three would have an interesting insight into different topics. Same if we throw science into the mix. So you really got to kind of consider these different areas and what they're bringing, and don't just come to the table with this black and white view of, oh, it's either right or it's wrong. Most writing in college is not going to be about writing for right or wrong. It's going to be about writing to demonstrate a particular perspective or a stance, and how that then either matches up, interferes, correlates, overlaps with other perspectives on a topic or issue. This is also, though, important when you're considering maybe approaching someone in the work field. Maybe it's a manager or a boss, or maybe it is a teacher or another student, where you have differing perspectives on something. You don't see it the same way. So you always want to approach this with a little bit of caution. And anytime you find yourself feeling like you have to qualify your statement with something like, I don't mean to be offensive, or I hope I don't come across, no, that should stop right there. That's like red flag that you're going to say something offensive. You should not have to qualify your statements. And so really step back and think about how you could frame something in a way that's not going to be confrontational, that's not going to evoke a negative response, right? It is great to have differing perspectives. It's fantastic. It's one of the things that makes writing and college in general exciting, is because people come with so many different ideas and perspectives and thoughts on ideas or thoughts on topics. But you got to make sure that you're handling those in a way that isn't going to cause negative conflict. So a couple things to consider. You can use statements of understanding, like, oh, I really understand where you're coming from. It has to be genuine, of course, but here's how I see it. Or another way that I view this topic is, so you're not saying that the other person is wrong or has false information or is incorrect. You're saying, hey, you know what, here's where I'm coming from, and that can add to the discussion. So again, it's not about trying to argue back and forth or prove someone right or wrong. Now, another aspect that can often help in writing and making sure that your writing is being really considerate of an audience is to consider ethos, pathos, and logos in your writing. And so some of you have been introduced to these before, some of you may have never heard of them, but it's basically the idea that you're going to make sure that as a writer, that you have authority and that you're bringing a credibility to your writing that people can believe, that your readers can believe. It has to do with making an emotional connection. So something beyond just basic data and evidence. You want to bring in that human side to things. And humans are often illogical. We are not always basing our ideas and knowledge and beliefs and values on hard evidence. And so you have to really consider that and think about how you're going to introduce that human side into your writing to make sure that you're recognizing that. And then finally, of course, is that you do have logic in what you're saying. You have to be able to back up your ideas with some sort of evidence. And sometimes that evidence takes the place of research. Sometimes it can be things like personal experience as a way to back up what you're saying. But you do want to make sure that you have some sort of evidence. You can't just make a claim about something and not back it up in any way. Oh, wait, too far ahead. There we go. So along the lines of audience and purpose, other things to consider is that your tone and word choice are appropriate to your audience. So that does not mean that you're writing using these big fancy words that everyone has to look up in a dictionary. You should not have word choice in your writing that other people have to look up. And that's, again, the average person should not have to go and look up words that you're using. We want to use everyday language, but everyday language that is concrete and clear and specific, okay? Tone should always remain professional. There is not a time when you're doing traditional academic writing where you would use less than a professional tone. Now, professional can range, so it's not like it is overly formal or overly informal. It has a balance to it. It's about being respectful and courteous and considerate in your writing. And that's something to, again, consider across the boards that really does translate out into the professional workplace environment as well as within the college and classroom environment. You always want to make sure that you're writing, and this is something to just check yourself on all the time. Everyone should really consider this, is that you really want to avoid any language that's going to come across as condescending, patronizing, or as being always right. It's going to sound like you're talking down to either your peers, your instructor, other people that you're working with, potentially even business associates. And that's not the best way to approach having different information. Everyone's coming to a writing classroom with unique experiences, with unique ideas, and they should all be given equal credit. So just be a little bit cautious that you don't sound like, from a student's perspective, that you're trying to teach your peers or inform them on something that they're not asking you to inform them on, okay? Helping each other out, collaborating is amazing. It's great. You should do that. But you want to make sure that it's welcome and that it's presented in a way that's not going to come across as this sort of as sounding like you're better than they are. Okay. And kind of the last part of this, and it really connects to that previous one too, is that you really want to avoid sounding that you're elitist, so that you're better than they are or superior to your readers in some way. It doesn't matter if you are coming from Running Start and you're still a high school student, someone just out of high school, someone that's been in the workforce for a long time and is returning to college, someone who's maybe just finished a degree and working on a second one. It doesn't really matter where you're at in your academic and your experience in life. You're bringing something unique to the classroom, and all of those voices need to be honored and recognized. And so when you're writing, you want to make sure that you're not sounding like you're coming across as better than whoever you're writing to, because again, that's just going to evoke a negative response, which is not going to be taken well by an audience and probably not going to help you achieve your purpose very well. So beyond audience and purpose, of course, once you have your audience and purpose, you got to make sure that the content is focused. You don't want to be all over the place or taking on topics that are too broad, something that would take a whole novel to write rather than maybe a 3-page essay or even a 7-8-page essay. You want to make sure that it's focused enough to really be able to get in depth with the content. Making sure that you include relevant information and support. So if I'm writing on something like food, there is a million different ways I can go with that topic, but not all of it's going to be relevant to the specific point that I want to make in an essay about food. Or if I'm writing to apply for a job, making sure that my resume only includes relevant information for that particular career and job, not just everything I could possibly throw in there, okay? Always want to have explanation and analysis. So make sure that you are explaining your ideas. Do not let them stand by themselves. Do not let source material speak for itself or evidence speak for itself. You analyze it, you explain it, you explain how it all ties together and what it means and what you want. Of course, the content itself should reflect your audience and purpose. Depending on who you're writing to is going to depend on the types of most appropriate evidence and points to include. Different audiences will need different information. Make sure that you're trying to approach writing from a more unique lens or angle. So this is particular to essays in that you really want to add to the conversation. So whatever the conversation is that's happening about a topic, say food, you don't want to just repeat all this information that's out there. A whole lot of people have written about food and had some great things to say, but what can you add to that? Can you approach it from a new angle, from a different thought process, from a different theory, from some new solution to the problem, or a way to maybe combine things that's being talked about? But always try and add to that current conversation rather than just being a repeat of what's already been said. Structure is, of course, important in writing. Clarity is a big piece of that, right? You want your writing to come across as clear, which means that it needs to be organized. It needs to follow whatever the genre expectations are. So there's different expectations, for instance, when you're writing, say, a resume versus when you're writing, when you're writing an essay. And even different types of essays have different structures and expectations surrounding that structure that we need to be considered. So doing personal writing, for instance, is different than doing, say, a more formal argument. It's also different than responding to a particular text or doing a critical analysis of a particular text. So really important to make sure that you understand the expectations within that specific type of writing that you're working on. Of course, it is so important to address specific instructions or directions. And this is true whether you're doing business writing or college writing. You have to follow the directions. If an instructor asks for 2 to 4 pages, it should be absolutely clear that you've hit 2 full pages, and you shouldn't go over 4 full pages. You want to stay within those guidelines. That's part of being a strong writer, is being able to navigate different expectations and different different guidelines, different sets of instructions. So always pay really close attention to what's being asked for so that you don't fall outside of guidelines. And this is true even on like minor assignments versus, say, an essay. Want to make sure that the instructions are clearly being addressed. And then, of course, just the overall order of ideas. Want to make sure that there's some logic to it. If you're telling a story, you don't want to start in the middle without a reason, right? Your audience has to know where they're going and why. And so in typical essay structure, you do want to give a thesis pretty early on. It doesn't mean you outline every single idea you're going to talk about. It just means that you're giving the reader a sense of direction so that they know why they're reading and where you're going, right? They want to have some idea of where they're headed. If you lose a reader, it's often because they got lost, right? They really just, for whatever reason, couldn't follow the structure of ideas, and so they stopped reading. So structure is always something really important to consider. Of course, any type of writing where you're using source material, so that's anything that you research or any ideas that are not your own, you must make sure that you are taking some extra precaution, extra consideration. So only use source material as appropriate. Not every college assignment is going to ask for it. And in fact, some are going to directly say do not include it. And others, even if they don't say do not include it, are not expecting it. They don't want it. Most assignments will either tell you directly to complete research or even a specific number or type of sources to look for. And anytime you have questions about whether you should be doing research or not, then of course, talk to your instructors. Same thing with writing for any sort of outside of the college work. Like make sure you understand if you need to be including sources or not in the type of writing that you're working on. Of course, a second use source material, you have to make sure that you're applying a citation style, such as APA, MLA, Chicago. There's a whole bunch of them. APA and MLA are just the two common college ones that are used. So if you are using something like, regardless of the citation style, it doesn't really matter which one, there's going to be like a specific format. So visually, how do you set up the document? There's going to be how you integrate sources into your writing. And then also the in-text citations. So what do you include to make sure that you're citing them appropriately within the writing? Most of the time that takes place within an essay. And then how do you make sure that you have your list of references at the end? And again, they each have a specific way to do it, but those are the 4 pieces that you have to consider. And so if you're missing one of those, then that can really land you into issues of plagiarism. Now, when you integrate source information, you can't just drop it in wherever you want with your essay. It has to be intentional and it needs to be introduced and explained. So you can't just do in-text citation, whatever comes in parentheses, and expect that to be enough. It's actually not enough. You need to fully introduce your sources. That helps establish your credibility as the writer. And then it also will make the sources more authoritative for the reader. It'll be easier to believe them if they know where they're coming from and who is speaking. Be aware of genre and context expectations. So this kind of goes back to the use as appropriate. Not every type of writing requires source material, and you do not have to have research to have strong writing. It depends on the type of writing and the expectations that go with it. So just be really aware of that. If you're not sure, again, ask your instructors or ask whoever the body would be that you would be presenting your writing to. Always avoid plagiarism, right? That's why this is so important. You cannot take other people's ideas or information and put them off as your own. Biggest thing to remember, it doesn't matter if you quote directly or if you paraphrase or summarize into your own words. The second you take someone else's information ideas, it has to reflect appropriate citation. And then, of course, just source credibility. Using sites such as Wikipedia, .com websites where you don't know who the sponsor is, those are just not going to come across as credible as, say, a peer-reviewed scholarly journal where it's looked over and taken a close look at by people within that same field. So it's just something to always consider. Again, you don't just want to pull any source from online. That can actually weaken your writing versus helping it. And then finally, of course, you do have to consider grammar, though this is not the thing that you should consider first. It's the thing you should consider last. And when we think about grammar, it actually breaks down into sort of these 3 big categories, which is sentence structure / sentence variety, right? Making sure that you don't set up your sentences in a really repetitive format over and over and over. The word choice, of course, that's how you achieve tone. It's also often how you achieve clarity. And then with word choice too, it just has to go down to using the correct word, right? There's a lot of words that sound alike, but they're not alike. So you got to make sure that you're using the correct words for the correct situation. And then basic punctuation, right? You want to make sure that yes, you are capitalizing words when you need to, that you are putting punctuation at the end of sentences, that your punctuation surrounding your source material is accurate, and then that you're not incorporating punctuation that's causing problems. So, which comes back to the last point that I'll get to in a second. Biggest thing with grammar is just proofread. Like, actually take the time to go over your writing and look for these errors. Even if you have issues in grammar, which by the way, most people do, then you're going to be able to find errors if you just look for them. The biggest mistake students sometimes make is just skipping that step. They don't go back and look for those little errors, and then it becomes relevant to whoever's reading, right? Because then they can cause problems. And really the biggest issues with grammar that you have to be aware of is grammar that's going to interfere with your meaning. That's where grammar actually becomes a problem. So there's lots of little grammar errors that don't change the meaning of what you're saying, okay? Those are not the biggest ones to be worried about. The biggest ones to be worried about are those that are actually going to change the meaning, make it unclear, make it awkward to read or confusing, and those are the ones to pay the most attention to. So that is sort of an overview of this idea of what it means to have strong academic writing. Of course, this does not include everything. It does not include every type of situation. It is just a nice overview, a good solid place to start in any writing course to make sure that everyone is on the same page with expectations. As always, if you have questions about anything in a video, please contact myself or your instructor. Other than that, have a great day.